You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
What is the future of the biblical languages? Hi, I'm Doug, and I want to challenge you about the future of studying the biblical languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Not long ago, I was talking with Dr. Peter Gentry. We were talking about the decline of language requirements and language study in certain programs, and he said to me, "It is up to your generation to fight for the languages." That stuck with me. It is up to your generation to fight for the languages. Now, you don't have to look very far to see that the requirements for Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, if the program even has Aramaic, these are slipping. These are declining precipitously in certain programs. Some programs are reducing the number of hours. Some are simply allowing the substitution of Hebrew tools or Greek tools courses instead of actually learning the biblical languages. Some programs may not require or offer them at all. Brothers and sisters, this should not be. We need to prioritize the study of the biblical languages in our schools. Now, as someone who has had to pursue a significant portion of my graduate work and beyond as a non-traditional student, I certainly appreciate non-traditional modes of delivery and alternative ways to learn. However, I am convinced that schools and educational institutions still have their place and are still great places to learn the biblical languages. In fact, if you're able to take advantage of on-campus instruction, there's nothing better than being able to be in the room with the professor, with other students, on campus, near the library, conversations in the cafeteria, and so forth. That's a great way to start out in your study of the biblical languages, if you can. And while I champion all kinds of ways to study those languages, today's episode is mostly going to be about the study of the biblical languages, their future in our educational institutions. And I hope you, like myself, want to see the study of the biblical languages thrive, not wither, but flourish in our educational institutions, whether someone is training specifically to be a biblical scholar or as a minister or a missionary. I hope we want to see the biblical languages be foundational when someone's getting a degree in these areas. So I want to talk about 5 ways we can champion the study of the biblical languages on into the future. Now, I want to address several people in this episode who have stakes in the study of the biblical languages, and I think this is actually encompasses a lot of people: administrators, department heads, faculty, students, donors, and I think there are some others who may have some concern too, and there's something very simple but powerful they can do as well. The first way I want to encourage us to think about the future of the biblical languages is to prioritize their study. Prioritize the study of the biblical languages. If you are an administrator or a department head, someone overseeing the curriculum and the instruction for an institution, don't water down the requirements for the biblical languages. In fact, strengthen them if you can, make them foundational, organize the scope and sequence of your curriculum so that future courses build on early courses in the biblical languages. Start getting them in year 1 so those later book studies and exegesis classes can build on what the students have been learning. Hire quality faculty who are both experts in their discipline but also master teachers who are continually growing in their craft and who love the students and love to teach the biblical languages and have a passion for that. Don't put them in a straitjacket by getting into publishing deals and requiring them to use a given curriculum, because different professors, different teachers will have different personalities, different ways that they are able to communicate effectively, and you don't want to micromanage and put all those things there, but you do want to give them a good structure where they can succeed in teaching in a biblical languages program that can flourish with students who are going to love to learn. So prioritize the biblical languages in your program. Do not shortchange your students and the people whom they will be serving as scholars or ministers or missionaries by taking out the most important foundational skill to be able to dig into God's Word, and that is to be able to access it and to read it and to exegete from the original languages. So prioritize the study of the biblical languages. Second, provide for the study of the biblical languages. I want to speak primarily to those who would be donors. Perhaps you studied the languages yourself, or maybe you didn't, but you understand their importance and you care about them. And God has blessed you in some way financially, whether it's something you came into or something that resulted from your business and from just diligent hard work, but you have some money that you would like to invest in the future of biblical scholars, ministers, or missionaries, and you want to see that money put to work. That's a great thing. You could do it in multiple ways. You can set up scholarships. I was the beneficiary of a generous scholarship at my church, and if it hadn't been for that scholarship, I wouldn't be talking about the biblical languages right now. I had a wonderful opportunity to dig in and take multiple courses, and it changed my life for the better, and I'm so thankful for that. And you can provide something like that for students. Maybe there is a student you know of, and you think this would be a good candidate for some help here in this area. You could pay for part of the education, perhaps finance the entire education, or set up a fund through an organization for such a scholarship or at a school. And that would be a great way to promote the study of the biblical languages and provide for that. Another way you could help provide is through endowment of a chair or a professorship at a school, and you could have money earmarked, strings attached in this case, that this has to be used for someone who is going to teach the biblical languages and try to establish what will hopefully be a permanent presence in that institution, in that school, for teaching the biblical languages. Another thing that's helpful in terms of being a donor is funding projects. There are some book projects, there are some reference works that need creation and need scholars who have funding to do it. There are things that need revising, there are things that need translating. In English, we have an embarrassment of riches at our disposal when it comes to biblical scholarship. But that's not true of many other languages in the world, and this is another way you can promote the study of the biblical languages, is by investing in projects that will help to get those resources created or revised or made available to people who need them desperately. So prioritize, provide. The third way to promote the study of the biblical languages into the future is to prove their worth. Now, I want to speak primarily here to teachers of the biblical languages. You need to be continually growing in your knowledge of the language. Don't stagnate. Don't stop with whatever the last course you had in that language was, or say, well, I earned my terminal degree and I don't have to do anything else. No, you're a lifelong learner, inspiring lifelong learners. Keep learning. Keep growing. Be willing to admit where you're wrong. Keep growing in your craft as a teacher. But you've got to show through your scholarship, through your work among your students, through how you can include them, invite them to come alongside what you're doing, or give them opportunities for presentations, help connect them with networking opportunities and so forth. You've got to show them that there's some real payoff to the study of the biblical languages, both in terms of modeling it and also of giving them the opportunity to experience it firsthand, so that we are seeing teachers who are investing and pouring into future biblical scholars, future ministers, future missionaries, Bible translators, and so forth, and people can see, whoa, this really is worth pursuing. And that leads me to the fourth thing, not only prioritizing, not only providing for, not only proving the worth of the biblical languages in this case, but also pursuing them. Now, students, I want to speak to you primarily. If you are studying the biblical languages, if you have the opportunity, the ability to do that, you have a stewardship, and you need to take it very seriously. If you're able to choose the school that you go to, then by all means, look for programs that are robust in the biblical languages, that require them even from the first year would be a great thing, that build upon them with course after course after course that assumes and adds to your knowledge of the biblical languages. Pour yourself in. Now, you may not have a professor who has a teaching style that you particularly prefer. That's okay. Hopefully you can supplement, you can be flexible, maybe even change professors the next semester or something like that. But whatever you do, say, I'm in this. I'm committed. This is a season, and I'm going to get the most out of this. Try to integrate it with things you're already doing. For example, if you are teaching Bible lessons or you are preparing sermons, integrate what you are learning with the language study. into that. You will not regret investing yourself in the study of the languages as you pursue them. And as you pursue them, encourage other students along the way. Learning is best done in community. Involve, help people, study together, encourage your professors. It means a lot when a teacher realizes an impact is being made in the life of the student, and the student actually cares about what is being taught and appreciates the work of the teacher. So dive in, pursue the study of the biblical languages. Now, we've talked about prioritizing the study of the biblical languages in institutions. We've talked about providing for their study. We've talked about proving the worth of their study, and we've talked about pursuing their study. The fifth thing I want to talk about is praying for their study. Now, I'm a confessional scholar. As a confessional scholar, I believe the Scriptures are the revelation from God, given from God. As a Christian confessional scholar, I believe that God has breathed out His Word through the prophets and the apostles, the Old Testament and the New Testament, that those are the very Word of God. And that motivates me in studying the biblical languages. And I realize that there are other people, there are other groups that also care about the biblical languages, and many times we do have concerns and desires that overlap. But in this point about prayer, I'm speaking especially to my Christian brothers and sisters, that whether you have the ability, the interest, the opportunity to study the biblical languages or not, I hope you see their value. I hope you see that they can bless and help many people who are preparing for life as a scholar, preparing for life as a minister, preparing for life as a missionary or as a Bible translator, and that you will pray for the study of the languages, that you will pray that people will prioritize them, that we will continue to have opportunities available in our educational institutions, and that people will be able to get into those programs and study the Bible in the original languages. I hope you will pray that God will stir up the hearts of people to pursue biblical scholarship, ministry, missions, Bible translation. I hope you will pray for people who are pursuing study in those programs, that they will be diligent, that they will persevere, that they will be committed, and that they will grow and even enjoy the study of the biblical languages. And pray that they will not be distracted, that they will not be drawn away, that they will not be discouraged and want to give up and become another statistic. There's a lot of attrition that occurs in biblical language courses at times. I was almost one of those statistics myself, but God, in His kind providence, brought someone across my path who encouraged me, and I was able to jump back in and continue with my study of those languages. So pray that God will do that. Maybe there's a student right now that needs that prayer, is about to walk away or has walked away, and who God can bring someone across their path to return. This is another way we can think of how the biblical languages can advance. And pray for these opportunities to expand beyond current schools, beyond current geographical borders and language borders. Pray that more and more people will find the opportunity, and that they will take full advantage of that opportunity to study the biblical languages. We have a great responsibility. If we care about the Scriptures, if we care about the message of the Bible, we have a great responsibility to see that the biblical languages continue to be taught, continue to be learned, continue to be used, continue to be enjoyed for all that is in them. And I hope that you will take up this challenge, and that you will prioritize, that you will provide for, that you will prove, that you will pursue. And if you can't do any of those, that you will at least pray for the studying of the biblical languages to keep going forward for the glory of God and for the good of all who hear and access His Word. Let's resolve to guard and advance the study of the biblical languages for future generations. What kind of treasures can we find when we study the book of Esther in biblical Hebrew? Hi, I'm Doug, and I want to encourage you in studying the biblical languages. Today, we want to talk about 5 insights into Esther from studying biblical Hebrew, and this recording is being made on Purim 2024. So as we look at the book of Esther, there are some things that we can look at as beginners, as intermediate students, as advanced students, You can use websites like sepharia.org, stepbible.org to get started no matter where you are on your journey into gleaning some insights from the Hebrew of Esther. So 5 insights. Number 1, characterization and intertextuality. Now, what are we talking about? Those are 2 big words. Characterization, we're talking about the way the characters in a narrative, in this case, are described and portrayed. So the description, the actions they perform, the responses they give, things like that are very important. Intertextuality refers to the usage of language that is drawn from earlier texts in later texts. And both of these things are important in the book of Esther, and you have to read closely and carefully to pick up on them. Now, as for characterization, we see Esther. She is described in a unique way. The text says in Esther 2:7 that Esther is Yafat To'ar V'Tovat Mar'eh. Now, what is Yafat To'ar and V'Tovah Mar'eh? The physical description is that Esther has a beautiful form and a pleasing appearance. Now, she's not the first person to be described in the Bible in terms of a commendation of physical appearance, although she is unique in having these particular groupings of words put together in this particular construction. Let's think, who else, intertextually, who else could this be reminding us of? We think of the matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel. Go back and check out their descriptions. There are some things that they have in common with this description in Esther. We see not only the matriarchs, but we see one of their children, Rachel's son, Joseph, is described in almost identical language with the same root words being used to describe his appearance. We see descriptions also, for example, with David's daughter Tamar. And we see Vashti in the book of Esther also being given a description that commends her beauty. And so this is an interesting part of the characterization in the book of Esther. By having Esther described in such a way, we know she is a very key character and that something is going to happen in regard to Esther's beauty. Another instance of characterization and intertextuality, the way Mordecai and Haman are introduced. We learn that Mordecai, intertextually, shares lineage with Saul, the first king of Israel. And we learn that Haman is an Agagite. Now, there's no accident there. Intertextually, that recalls 1 Samuel 15, where Agag, the king of the Amalekites, has been spared by Saul and Samuel executes him. But there is a connection being drawn here between the book of Esther and the events of 1 Samuel, and that's going to be very important for the tension in the narrative going forward. So these are some amazing examples of characterization and intertextuality that you can pick up on as you study the book of Esther. And yes, you can see this in translation, but you see it more vividly in high definition when you are studying it in biblical Hebrew. The second avenue of insight into the book of Esther involves noticing the layout in the manuscript tradition. And the biblical Hebrew paratext is what we're talking about here. We did a whole episode on paratext, and in short, we're talking about those elements on the page that are not the text itself, but the way it's arranged and laid out. And when you look at manuscripts of the book of Esther, if you look at Codex Leningrad, if you look at Megillat Esther, you will see the names of Haman's sons. You will see Ve'et, which is a vav, a conjunction with the definite direct object marker on the left edge, and then the next line will have that object being a name of one of Haman's sons. And it talks about how they were killed, but it lists them, Ve'et and the name, Ve'et and the name, 10 times all the way down, and it visually pictures, to use the words of Dr. Tea Gomolari, to whom I must give a couple of hat tips today. It is a visual midrash. So they are giving a commentary by virtue of the way they've copied this text. And you can see, for instance, how in one manuscript here we have an entire page dedicated to this. Now, this is important, and there's probably some intertextuality going on here too, because in the manuscript tradition, the 31 kings that were conquered in Joshua chapter 12 are listed in a similar manner. And then you've also got the whole connection with Saul and Agag, and the situation with the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15, and then the death of Saul and his sons, who were publicly displayed on a tree, like Haman and his sons. There are some amazing connections that are drawn out by paying attention simply to the layout of the manuscript and how that's being highlighted. A third avenue of gathering insights into the book of Esther is to observe the textual divisions. This, again, is an element of paratext and has to do with the arrangement of the text, in this case segmenting it with spaces and dividing it into smaller chunks, smaller units. And one interesting example here is the ending of the book. Instead of keeping the final 3 verses with what precedes, verses 1 through 3 are separated. Now, we don't always know the reason these are separated, but it's worth noticing when you see these textual divisions. It's worth asking, what does this produce for the reader? What does this highlight? What does this emphasize? According to Goswell, one way we could look at this aspect of the scribal tradition is that some wanted to downplay the role of Esther and elevate Mordecai a bit more in the book. He writes, this way of partitioning the text could be understood as an attempt to make Mordecai the sole hero of the book. I'm not offering the last answer on this by any means, but as I mentioned, you can get some insights, at least into how people understood the text in grouping it in these ways, and it can make you pay attention to some aspects of the book that you might not have noticed otherwise. A fourth avenue of collecting insights of study from the book of Esther involves doing lexical studies. So if you want to check out how a word is used throughout Esther, there are amazing connections that you can see across the book. There are also intertextual connections once again, and you can look at roots like Nun, Tzadeh, Lamed in Esther 4:14. It talks about how deliverance would come from another place if Esther doesn't proceed according to the plan Mordecai is suggesting. That is a noun from that root, but when you look up that root and you find all the instances of the verb, natsal, to deliver, then it's an amazing thing to see people snatching things and maybe animals and so forth. But there are many, many, many passages that talk about Yahweh delivering his people. And so it's a common thing to find this root throughout Samuel, throughout Psalms, but also even back in the book of Judges with the deliverances that are done there. And there are other places in the Hebrew Bible as well. I'll leave that to you to further investigate. Just want to give you some hints here today. And anytime you see something in the text that you think is some kind of a key word, check out how it's being used throughout that book. Check out how it's being used in some other passages. And in Esther 4:14 in particular, if this is an intertextual reference, maybe it's a subtle way of bringing in some other themes that are not explicitly given to us in the book of Esther. You notice when you study the book in Hebrew, there's no Elohim, no Yahweh to be found explicitly mentioned in the book. But the lexical studies of the words that are in the book can give some potential connections, perhaps, that might connect to that theme. They can also show you some things about the inner workings of the book itself. And I want to just go ahead and transition from this into our fifth insight, because it involves looking at not just one word, but looking at groups of words and patterns of words, particularly the structure of the book as a whole, and thinking of Esther as a chiastic structure. Now, we've got to be careful. There are some people who have a chiasm mania and see these everywhere, but we shouldn't go the other extreme and pretend they don't exist even on large levels within major sections or entire books. Now, one resource I'd recommend that talks about the chiastic structure some is Karen Job's commentary, the NIV application commentary on Esther. Now, Job's is a top-notch scholar who has expertise in the Hebrew and Greek versions of Esther, and she talks about different aspects of the reversals in the book of Esther. And the chiastic structure idea, that is the epitome of a reversal, because it is a reverse symmetry where you will have elements that precede a center point at which everything changes and then starts moving into reverse. And she gives 3 diagrams. One is about banquets and feasting in Esther, where there are 2 banquets that begin and end the book. You have Xerxes' banquet for the nobles of the empire, and then for all the men in Susa. And then the book ends with a first and second day of feasting with Purim. And then the next level would be Esther's coronation banquet which is matched by a feasting and celebration of Mordecai's promotion. And then in the center, you have the two banquets given by Esther for the king and Haman. So there's some interesting symmetries there. And then I'm going to just mention a few of these and leave these for you to check out if you want to look in more detail. She has a chart of chiastic structures of reversals in Esther. For example, in 3:10, the king gives Haman his ring, and in 8:2, the king gives Mordecai the same ring. In 3:12, Haman summons the king's scribes, and in 8:9, Mordecai summons the king's scribes. There are many examples she gives here. Mordecai wears sackcloth in 4:1, and then Mordecai wears royal robes in 8:15. There are examples that you could take from a chart like this, and you could look up the words using a resource like stepbible.org. You could see if they're mirrored with the exact language. That's one of the things about studying chiastic structures. You can have thematic chiasms. Those can be a little harder to prove at times, but when you have exact lexical matches of words, and especially of phrases, if you have opposites in meaning, maybe you have the same verb, but you've got a different subject. You've got people who are obviously in stark contrast, like Haman and Mordecai. In this instance, the chiastic structure can highlight and bring out some of those major differences and definitely show us a reversal. She has another chart on the literary structure of Esther with the two banquets bookending the work. The king celebrating two banquets, and then the Jews celebrating two feast days, and then Esther's first and second banquets in the middle, and then the turning point in chapter 6, when the king cannot sleep. It's sleepless in Susa, and then the whole plot of Haman unravels, and everything is going bad for him from then on, and things are going to work out for the Jews in the book. There are some amazing things to see in the book of Esther, many, many more insights. We've hardly scratched the surface, and I hope you will check into some of those. Now, with that lack of mention of God and no appearance of the divine name in the book of Esther as such, we should mention a couple more things. So as a bonus, a couple more hat tips here. First, a hat tip again to Dr. Tea Gomolari, who let me know about a presentation by Professor Ignacio Carvajosa concerning Megillat Esther, subtitled How to Find a Needle in a Haystack. Professor Carvajosa points out that there's a manuscript from Madrid that has some special markings over letters that occur on 4 consecutive words. Those letters are Yod, He, Vav, and Hey. 4 consecutive words, Esther 5, verse 4, begin with each of those letters in sequence. So one word begins with Yod, the next begins with Hey, the next begins with Vav, the next begins with Hey. And then in chapter 7, verse 7, he also points out that there are words that end in the same sequence. So you have the 4 words ending, the first with Yod, the second with Hey, the third with Vav, and the fourth with Hey. And so some think that maybe Esther has the divine name hiding right there under the surface in those sequences of letters. I will leave that for you to explore and to investigate further. It's certainly an interesting and attractive idea that the words could have intentionally been placed in such a way. But this has certainly been something that has been a conundrum for people for millennia now. And if you go back to the earliest traditions of Esther outside of biblical Hebrew, looking at the Greek versions of Esther, you can see in Greek Esther expansions, you can see details about calls for prayer, mention of the Lord God, that are not in the Hebrew text, possibly because people were uncomfortable with a Hebrew text that did not directly mention God. If you'd like to study that further, I got to give a hat tip to Joshua Alfaro. Thank you, Joshua, for reminding me recently on an online forum, replying to somebody else, but I read those too, that Karen Jobes, who wrote the NIV application commentary, also wrote the introduction to the New English translation of the Septuagint on Esther, and that's available freely online, and this is Job's wheelhouse. This is what she did her doctoral work on, so she's a great source for that if you want to get started studying the Greek versions of Esther in addition to the Hebrew. But however you proceed, studying Esther, studying other books, I hope you will stay at it and keep moving forward with your study of the biblical languages. And I hope you are seeing that there are many wonderful benefits to reading the Bible in high definition. What kind of treasures can you find when you study a book of the Bible in the original languages?
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.